started yet.
It's already started.
Pardon?
It's already started, so I don't forget.
It's not on yet.
It is on.
Okay, this is. Hi, everybody. You might remember me. I haven't been here for a few weeks, so anyway, this is the Public Affairs Forum, and we're going to have a special presentation on the unincorporated areas. We had the mayors last week, and this little camera right here, folks, is actually what we're going to be using today. We'd asked TVCC to come by today, and they were very good. They showed up last week. So we've been having some pretty good quality things on the internet and on the cable. But believe it or not, this little camera right here gives a fairly serviceable product. And Eric Squires is in Italy today. Joseph set up this thing again for us. So our program today has been published and it's out there. We're going to have Commissioner Malinowski. We're going to have Karen Bolin, the Aloha Business Association, and Mike Dahlstrom, the Aloha Reedville Association, speak on the unincorporated areas. Last week we had the three mayors here talking about their plans. Next week I believe we're going to have the Water District. We asked the PSU population census and we just didn't get a word back from them. So in any event, let's start the program now. This is the Washington County Public Affairs Forum. I am John Tyner and I am president of the Forum. The Forum is a public service group dedicated to organizing public affairs so that people can participate. The program today is the growth in the unincorporated part of the county. And Karen Bolin, I see, is here, and Mike Dahlstrom and Commissioner Malinowski. Have you folks worked out how you want to arrange the priority of your presentation?
We have.
Well, Karen's a very take-charge individual. So what I'm thinking about doing is, I have a minimalist approach. I don't introduce the folks, I let people introduce themselves. You know what the program is. I'm going to let Karen take over at least part of the introduction of the program. Did you need a PowerPoint presentation? Not going to happen. Good. Okay, again, just so everybody knows, the things you say are public, will be on cable TV and on the internet. That little camera right there is the process by which we do it. It's going to be edited down to 58 minutes. And we're going to have a brief board meeting following this. So board members, we can stick around just a little bit. And there's going to be 3 speakers and time for questions. So that means a soft 12 to 15 minutes for each presentation and then questions. And you can go lesser or longer if you want to. We do not have the limitations of the big camera here. We're going to edit that down. So Karen, I've known Karen for some time. I'll let Karen introduce herself. She works for a financial services company in the area, which she'll identify. And again, it's a minimalist approach, so I'll be at the minimum. And remember, when you ask your questions, we're going to be succinct, germane, and those are always called short and sweet. Any self-facing advertisement or things like that, I'll be as polite as possible, but as polite as necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, John, for the opportunity to address everyone. I've been coming as a member of this for a few months now, so I kind of have the lay of the land, so it's nice to see all of you. I am Karen Bolin. I'm a financial advisor in Aloha on 185th and Blanton. My company is Edward Jones. We have 12,000 branches, and I'm one of 12,000, and I've had a successful 2012, looking forward to a great 2013, and have served as the Aloha Business Association president for 2 years, going into my 3rd year now. The Aloha Business Association started in 2010, February of 2010. There was some energy around the football team's win in December of 2009 that created an Aloha community energy that has not been duplicated since or before, I'm sure. So those boys winning that football championship for the state of Oregon catapulted Aloha into the eye of everyone, and our own John Tyner's son, Tommy Tyner, was certainly a part of that success, I'm sure. And it's exciting to have community engagement, but then the question was, how can we use that energy to create what it is Aloha wants to look like in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? One of the things I did as president is I went down to the Washington County Historical Museum, did some research on Aloha, and found out that we started because the Postmaster General in Washington, D.C. declared that Aloha could have a post office in January of 1912. So here I am in March of 2011 thinking, okay, there's a reason to have a party. So we put together, through the Aloha Business Association, a centennial celebration. That was held at Mountain View Middle School a year ago, January. We had 600 people attend. It was the first time Aloha had a community celebration that was just about Aloha. How many people attended? Very nice. Sheriff, you were on video, that's right. So we had a great celebration and a community energy that was really wonderful. The catalyst for the Aloha Business Association was really to create a voice to coincide with the study that's going on, the Aloha Reedville study that's going on, to determine what is the best way to make the Aloha community vital and prosperous for the next 100 years. And I will tell you, having served on the Citizens Advisory Committee and listened to the analysis and attending community events, I don't know what the answer is to that question. If I was to tell a child what is it the study means, it would be, if you were given millions of dollars to fix Aloha, what would you do? What are the 10 things that you would do, and in what order? So I invite all of you to start considering, if you were given millions of dollars to fix your own community or Aloha, what would you do and in what order? And I guarantee you everyone in this room will have a different list. So the challenge with our Washington County Land Use and Transportation Department is they were the ones that wrote for the grant. The money was given through various sources, and they are now leading the charge to bring those questions to the table, analyze where are we now, where would we like to go, and what is that going to look like, and then the question is who's going to pay for it. So any of you that remember Aloha having some energy around becoming a city back in the early 80s, my understanding, having been to the Optimist Club recently, was that when the citizens were told what that was going to cost them in their property taxes, they said no thank you. So now here we are in 2013. We don't have the layer of government that helps sidewalks be created, that they all connect. We don't have a layer of government that looks into economic development to woo those businesses to come to Aloha to help us build a strong business infrastructure. We don't have those services because we don't have a city layer of government to create and bring those to us, because we chose not to pay for it. So the county, I think, is doing a very good job of giving us what they can, but they have to spread it amongst a lot of different places, not just Aloha. The study that we get is a gift. It's an opportunity that none of the other areas have, we have it. So as Hillsborough has encroached on us over and over and over again, and is getting ready to ask the county to annex a bunch of land up to 209th, and as Beaverton is working on their 30-year economic development plan to do things in Beaverton up to 175th, we have a very little sliver of land. What I think the A for Aloha stands for is accessibility and affordability. Our challenge is to remain accessible, and our gift is that we are very affordable. We have affordable housing. We attract businesses in the professional services area, like medical, dental, legal, and financial, because we don't have to pay a business tax, right? We register with the state of Oregon, and that's it. So it's very attractive, I think, for small businesses that want to get a start in Aloha, and then maybe they develop more employees and they develop their product. So maybe Aloha could become an incubator of small business. Maybe we could maintain our affordability in housing by continuing to have strategic decisions around what that housing looks like and how accessible it is to our greater transportation system within Washington County. I don't think we can continue to think as citizens that it's Beaverton, Aloha, Hillsborough. I believe we have to think strategically about being a region where all of us are served, all of us can get our car from point A to point B, all of us can choose to take the bus from point A to point B, ride our bike or walk. Our children are safe going from home to school and vice versa. So safety, transportation, accessibility, affordability, those are the things that we want this study to help determine how do we do that. And then who's going to pay for it. So the catalyst was our success as a football community. The Aloha Business Association now has 80 members. We are proud of the fact that we have a new Aloha library that is privately funded. That's a very big feather in our cap, as the libraries have been cut out of the Beaverton School District for financing challenges. And I think that we in Aloha can do more, and I think our goal really is not to just survive. I think our goal is to thrive. And I think that this study is providing us a wonderful opportunity to define what that looks like. And I hear that the other two gentlemen that are going to speak, Mike Dahlstrom and then Greg, are going to talk a little bit more about what that involves. And then we decided as a group we'd like to do questions at the end of all 3 presentations. So if everyone's agreeable to that, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm proud to serve as the Aloha Business Association president. I really love what I do. My goal is for my clients to come to Aloha to visit with me to talk about their financial future and not have congestion, walk if they want to, ride the bus if they want to, and then desire to either go to a restaurant before or afterwards in Aloha. So that's my vision of how I want Aloha to be for my business, and I hope that I can continue to bring that vision and help businesses do business with each other, neighbor to neighbor, and want that same thing within our community. So thank you for the opportunity, and Mike, next.
Always a really hard act to follow. I'm Mike Dahlstrom. I'm with Washington County's Department of Land Use and Transportation and the Long Range Planning. I was given the opportunity to become the project manager on this 3-year study for Aloha Reedville, the unincorporated area. Throughout this process, it's been interesting because I've been approached by a number of people. One in particular asked me during a public event, I'd really like to talk to the mayor of Aloha. And I said, well, Aloha isn't really a city. I said, how long have you lived here? 14 years. So it sort of demonstrates the ambiguity that occurs around these very highly urbanized, unincorporated areas. They look like a city, they feel like a city, they have a sense of community, they have a sense of history, but as Karen pointed out, there's no city structure there. Aloha is just that. We had to set some boundaries when we began this study. So the obvious boundaries were to look to the cities to the east and the west. Aloha, the study area, starts on the eastern border with the city of Beaverton's city line, ends on the western border with the city of Hillsborough and the urban growth boundary, which will soon be possibly moved to incorporate some more lands called South Hillsborough or St. Mary's property. You may know it as that, or those of you who have been here a long time know it as the Reedville properties. To the north, it's bounded primarily by the Max line, but much of that area is also within the city of Beaverton and Hillsborough. And to the south, it's Cooper Mountain. We didn't want to incorporate all of Cooper Mountain because this started as primarily a transportation study to look at some key corridors. So we went just south of Farmington, acknowledging that everyone's lives that surround these arbitrary borders are affected by the decisions that are made. So this was really, as Karen said, it was a gift. It started as a request from Metro to look at some additional planning for this area within the existing urban growth boundary. We were able to get a small grant from Metro, and we were able to leverage that with a federal grant called Sustainable Community housing, which is an important and ever more visible interconnection for a community. This idea of siloizing, looking at transportation or looking at housing or looking at economics, is fortunately that evolution is progressing fairly quickly at all levels, including through the federal government. So we have this opportunity to look more holistically at the community, and that's really an important piece. Aloha, Reedville, and Cooper Mountain is one of 13 community plans that were developed by the county in 1983. We really haven't readdressed those plans in any substantive way since then. So this gift allows us to look at one of these larger urban unincorporated areas, Aloha. This study area has about 50,000 people. It would be the third largest city in the county. It would be the 12th largest city in the state, if it were a city. So this grant offered us an opportunity to go back to the community, and for the last year and a half, we've been continually asking the question, as Karen pointed out, what do you want this community to look like in the next 10, 20, or 30 years? What are the sort of key issues? And what we've heard to date is fascinating. We went into this study with ears open, trying to assess both issues and the assets of the community. The first year we concluded with what's called an existing conditions report. That's sort of hard line. We now know how many miles of sewers there are, how many acres of parks there are, and those are all good things to start with and to know as a basis so that we all have a shared understanding. But more importantly, what we heard from the community was members there love this community. They like it for its small community feel. They like it because it has a sense of rural attributes to it. There are no 10-story, 20-story apartment houses. It's a integrated community. People seem to know a lot of other people in the community. If you've heard of that 6 degrees of separation, that you know somebody a few people away, well, in Aloha it seems to be much tighter than that. There's a strong sense for a feeling, an acknowledgement of community. In an interview with one person who's lived there for 85 years, she's only lived in 2 homes her entire life. They were both in Aloha. She said, what I really want is a stronger sense of community. What we heard from the Aloha high school students during one of their leadership classes when we attended and discussed this with them, they really wanted a sense of community. From someone who had just moved there within 6 months, she said, what I desired is a sense of community. That doesn't have a hard thing about it. It may have a community center. It may have gathering places. It may have some identity. But this isn't really something you fix. It's something you help nurture. So what we're coming through this study with is defining sort of what are key issues that the county could address. A lot of them are hardscape. A lot of them are infrastructure pieces. The community desires more connectivity. What does that mean? Well, it means that people would like sidewalks everywhere. They'd like bike lanes everywhere. They'd like street lights everywhere. They'd like to be able to feel safe, get out of their house, have their children walk to school, they be able to walk to transit or the services they need. Aloha is a community that started in the turn of last century. A lot of that infrastructure doesn't exist. The county has the ability to address some of it, but not all of it. So where we are now is we're at this process of determining, as Karen said, if you had some financial resources, where could you apply them? What does the community think are the biggest issues? And this process, being the gift that it is also being looked at as a pilot program or a petri dish, if you will, because the issues that are addressed here and the benefits that we're hearing aren't limited to Aloha. They extend to all the other urbanized, unincorporated areas, not just in Washington County or the state of Oregon, but this is a national issue. There are fewer resources to address more needs, to attempt to retrofit communities that have been in existence for 50, 75, 100 plus years. So this is our opportunity, and right now we have this wonderful chance to determine what is the next step, what are the next steps. How do we find the money to address some of these issues? How do we use existing resources? And what role does the community play? And that's a big piece, because Karen just addressed briefly the Aloha Business Association, but the community library is a stunning example of what a community can do for itself. So in 2010, when the Sustainable Communities Grant was announced and we started this process, members of CPO 6 sort of brought an issue forward that had been hanging for years, that there was no library in this community. There are libraries close by, Hillsborough and Beaverton, and certainly beautiful facilities, but not something people could walk to, not something that people felt was their community. So members of CPO 6 stepped forward and said, you know, I think we should do this. And a small group of community members made the stunning advancement for their community that within about a year, they had not only formed a library community association, but they had applied for and received nonprofit status, that they had begun fundraising. And I'm going to say it took maybe a year and a half for Aloha to open its first library, to much fanfare, to much notoriety, both at the regional and even at the state level. So it's going to take, for all of our issues that are addressed countywide, it's going to take a collaborative approach, a cooperative approach. We're all going to have to look at the resources we can bring to bear on this, and we'll step forward as best as we possibly can. So to provide a little broader county perspective, I would like to introduce Commissioner Malinowski to talk about the broader county perspective on how we will address growth for the future. So thank you. I look forward to your questions at the end.
Hello, so I'm Greg Malinowski, Commissioner District 2. I get to give you a little more less up information, and also to give you a homework assignment on your way out of here as you go on to think of things. So we have a bunch of I'm going to turn this on so I don't bore you all day. We have a bunch of unincorporated communities in Washington County. As Mike mentioned, there's a couple 100,000 people in Washington County who don't live. They live in an urban area that don't live in a city. Some of the communities, you know, are Aloha, Reedville, Bethany, North Bethany, Rock Creek, Cedar Mills, Cedar Hills, Raleigh Hills, a bunch of them. And one thing I've discovered over the last couple of years doing this job is I get lots of little notes from them. I've gotten about 14 or 15 like this one. Greg, I live in unincorporated Washington County. More and more people are getting chickens. Currently, fowl are unregulated and there are potential problems. I suggest the commissioners look at the ordinances of other regional governments and pass laws to prevent cruelty to animals, neighborhood disputes, nuisances. And she sent me a link to what the city of Tualatin is doing. I've also gotten links of what the city of Beaverton is doing. I've gotten links from what the city of Hillsborough is doing. Well, we don't live in a city. We live in an unincorporated area. Here's a message I sent back to her. I'm just going to read it because I think it does as well as any. Hello, Mrs. Blank. The major difference in these other jurisdictions in Washington County is that the others are cities. We are a county. We do not provide a high level of urban services. So to some extent, we look to things from a rural perspective. We allow chickens and livestock in backyards, like you would in a rural area, with the exception that you are not allowed to raise them for resale or economic business. So if you want to raise chickens or a goat or a steer and slaughter them for personal use, folks have the right to do so. Since the unincorporated area is only about half of the county's population, it's not right to use general fund dollars for urban levels of services because folks in the unincorporated areas don't want to pay for them. I mean, that's one of the advantages to ALOA, is it's very affordable. We don't have a lot of the taxes and things. So, and indeed, in talking to some of my fellow commissioners, I've been told, well, people choose to live in Washington County just so they'll have the freedoms to do that thing, which is to, raise chickens or occasionally kill a goat in the backyard. As I got into this, I made the joke about killing goats in the backyard, only to find out, yes, that happens. The sheep was rescued. The folks who were doing the sheep were trying to fit into American society. They knew we all celebrated Thanksgiving, and so they brought their family together for what they used to celebrate, and that involved a sheep tied up in the backyard and a machete on the table next to it, and their neighbor who was up on the balcony from his home in the cul-de-sac was looking down at this sheep and this machete and decided nothing good was going to come of this. So when the sheriff's deputy got there, well, nobody exactly knew who had brought the sheep. And they realized the social faux pas of this and insisted the deputy put the sheep in the back of the patrol car and take it out so it would be safe. And we can't put them in the dog pound, so we got to hire a very expensive animal service to take care of us for the weekend until we were able to get it back to the people it was purchased from. The whole point of this is that the unincorporated areas need to really, really consider the difference between them and a city. And everybody here is big boys and big girls, so they can go ahead and decide for themselves if they want the services that a city provides, or if they prefer the freedom to have their neighbors kill goats in their backyard. The people with the goats in the county, it was all perfectly legit, and we went ahead and let them process those goats in the backyard. They weren't selling the meat. We got a gentleman in an R12 cul-de-sac whose neighbor has 17 chickens. He's a fairly new cul-de-sac. It's right across from PCC Rock Creek, and he's not selling the eggs officially, and so that's the way it goes, You'd be surprised how many times I've heard from the staff that if people want a certain service, they should move into town. If your neighbor has a code violation, for instance, they've built what is turning out to be a viewing port so they can watch you and your kids in the backyard of your house overlooking the fence, it comes down to that is another thing that we don't enforce. We don't do code enforcement. That's part of the money we don't charge you. So, you're all saving $2 to $3 a thousand by not in the city, but we don't provide that service. And the lady in particular was actually a code officer for a city, so she was wondering why we didn't do city-type code enforcement for that kind of thing. Well, you're not in a city, So I guess what I'm here to say, and then some of the other issues I should point out too. I've been told we don't really need to worry about affordable housing in some of our newer subdivisions because we have older neighborhoods in unincorporated Washington County, and that's where the affordable housing will be. If Aunt Maud and Uncle George want to get together and open up a dry cleaning service, if they do it in the city of Beaverton has actually set millions of dollars aside in banks that are to be loaned to people starting small businesses like that. And if you do it in Washington County, we will provide you with ZIP. And when I asked specifically about that with the staff, once again I was told that if people really want to start a small business, shouldn't they move to a city to do it and not try and do it in the incorporated area? So these are some of the things we need to think about going forward. All of our communities will get older. Mike Dahlstrom talked about the gift that we got from getting that money from the feds to do ALOA. It is a gift, and we're going to do great things with it, absolutely. But one of the reasons the situation is the way it was is that we plant a community once. We planted in 1980. We sold, the lots are sold off, the houses are built, we're done. There is no money from the county to ever look at those plans again, unless we get a grant from the feds or Metro or some other source. Now, you know, there are lots of good things. We do have the freedom to do a lot of things in our backyards without being noticed. I will say one more thing that tripped me up as I'm sitting here going through my head on this stuff. We had a gentleman who wanted to know exactly why the code wasn't in violation by his neighbor, and it turns out that our policy is not to tell people in writing why a certain code violation is all right. And it's because it creates legal problems. And so they will tell you verbally over the phone why it's not a violation of code, but they won't put it in writing. And I found that in the case where someone had built a one-story shed but put it on stilts 6 feet tall and closed in the bottom, and a two-story shed would definitely not meet code. But since it was a one-story shed on stilts with the bottom closed in, it's not 2 stories. But that's the kind of thing they want to put in writing. They'll put it verbally. So I guess what we're going to have to say is we can do, now there are some good things. We have excellent fire service. We have an excellent sheriff's department. And the fire service is so good, and we have a lot of special districts, and we're all special districts in the unincorporated area. The fire service is so good that there are a couple of cities that have hired them, contracted their fire service to them, to go ahead and provide that fire service, which gives that fire district even more. And Sheriff Garrett's back there, and I've encouraged him to try and do the same thing with the sheriff's department. For one thing, if all of this area were incorporated into cities, then the sheriff's department would have to shrink massively. We've got a good department. Why would we do that? So I guess what I'm saying is for all of you to go home and think creatively about what we can do. I will tell you there are going to be some challenges. I was part of the Misstep program this year. Misstep is, we passed a law a few years ago that says that when a development occurs, the developer should pay 28% of the cost of the road system. And the rest of us will pick it up when we feel like it. And we're about $2 billion behind right now, and no plans other than Misstep, putting a few million a year in to fix that. But one of the questions that came up is the cities get together to decide how to divvy up the money. And you don't have a city out here. You've got 120,000 people in my district who don't have a city to speak for them. And so I kind of went out on a limb and made some instructions and went out and toured some places and tried to get some stuff. And there was some minor pushback, nothing said publicly, so it's off the record, but just, these people don't want any services, Greg. Why are you giving them money to improve their roads? I mean, if they wanted services, get this, they should move to a city. So the question was, what are we going to do about that situation? There's kind of a bias that says, if these people don't want services, don't waste any money on giving them anything. Now, we pushed back, and fortunately the commission is behind. Those mayors are advisory to us. And so we kind of go ahead and we take their advice and then do what we think we need to do, what's right for our people. And we got our share in my district, in Dick's district. But there is that bias out there. So I don't have all the answers for everything. What do we want to do here going forward in the future? The cities are still, there's also another possibility. We could create a service district that will provide code enforcement. We can create a service district that will allow new planning to go on. We can provide a district that would be sobby enough not to let somebody kill goats routinely in their backyard. We can do all that, but we're going to have to collect that $2 to $3 a thousand that you're all saving by not being in the city. And there's no other way around it. The folks in the city are already paying those services, and they won't share with us if we just don't want to pay for it. The cities are still annexing ground, but they're not going after existing neighborhoods. They're going after undeveloped residential neighborhoods. They're going after commercial and industrial land. And every time they annex commercial and industrial land, which they're doing out in the Cedar Mill area, my understanding is that comes out of the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District. So that leaves, that money's not coming in there anymore, and so we all need to dig a little deeper for that. But frankly, a lot of the cities look at our older neighborhoods, unincorporated, and have as much enthusiasm for annexing us as you would have for your unemployed brother-in-law and his 4 kids to move in with you in the basement. It's like, are you sure you guys want to do that? Because the money is essentially in industrial and commercial. I was here in 1980 when they did the Aloha thing, and thank you for discussing that. So it was too expensive, but initially the Aloha plan called for financing the Aloha area with annexing Tennisborn, and that would have been the money, and the industry up there along that area would have been the money that would have supported the residential Aloha Reedville area. Well, Hillsborough grabbed it, Beaverton grabbed the other side of 185th, and it turned out that when you're just back to residential, nobody wants to pay the taxes for that level. So now at the time, Beaverton and Hillsborough promised they would not leave Aloha to just rot in the wind without, you know, putting money into it and stuff like that. The trick is, it's been 32 years and the feds have stepped in. Thank you very much for the feds. They're picking up 65% of the cost of the Aloha study. We're probably going to ask them to pick up another 10% or so. There is absolutely no money has been offered by anybody to pay for the actual implementation of that plan. In other words, you know, starting to do things and do things. At least I'm not aware of anybody offering it. So we're going to have a nifty plan. They don't have any money to ever do it again. So this kind of thing. We've heard a lot of good things today, but if you can go home and talk to your neighbors and say, okay, what do we want to do here? Keep in mind that if the city annexes you one house at a time, they're not going to make any kind of deal with you. But when they annex for a development, they go ahead and they say, well, we can phase the taxes in over this much or that much. And so my guess is that if 500 homes go in there as a group and ask to be annexed, that you'll be able to negotiate something, like taxes phased in over 5 or 10 years, or something else. The other thing to look at is to encourage your county commissioners to try and put together another service district, the one that's going to collect that $2 or $3 to bring you up to urban services. And the other addition is to make sure that the unincorporated area remains the most affordable place to live in the county, because the people next door are doing goats on holidays. But we just all need to think, and there may be different answers for different neighborhoods. Aloha's going to have a terrific plan here, outstanding plan. So the question is how we implement it and where we'll get the funds to do it from. So I wish I had some good news for you all on that. That's kind of what I got to say today. But and I'm certainly open for suggestions on how we manage it and how each one of your neighborhoods decides they want to go forward and what they want it to look like. The nice thing about the service department to provide those urban services is that the sheriff will still be our sheriff. So we would certainly contract with him. We wouldn't be starting a new one. So, yes, ma'am.
So how much of the unincorporated area is an enhanced sheriff's district?
I think all of it.
All of it.
So is there any reason why we couldn't upgrade what we wanted out of that enhancement?
For the sheriff's department, if we were willing to pass a bigger tax base, he could add more services. It wasn't a huge outstanding, it wasn't an overwhelming vote in the last time he asked though. And we had information that if we hired 2 code enforcement officers, that we probably would have lost. And so we didn't. 2.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me just talk about the format. I'm going to have people ask questions. Thank you for your presentation right there. I will repeat the question since we are on the a system. So persons within the center just identify themselves as forum members and ask the question. And the folks on the panel can walk up or they can sit back there to address them. I see a lot of interest here, and I'm really not going to extend too much control over the questions or the forums, but just be respectful to the next person. We can go long because we whatever limit we need when it goes on the television. So I'm going to restate the questions just so the question is on the record, and then or the person whom it's directed, if it's directed specifically to an individual can restate the question. So Bill, why don't you identify yourself?
I'm Bill Kroger, a Forum member. I'm just curious, and this might be for Mr. Malinowski. I'm just curious what kind of agreements the county has with the adjacent cities if the services of the city are required, like police or something, to flow into another area. I was wondering what kind of agreements they have to maybe cover the cost of that.
Bill Kroger, a Forum member, asked the question about how you would shape agreements where cities are created which result in reductions in county services or county revenue to the county for the services the county formerly provided. Is that the question, Bill?
Yeah, just
This is a better question for the sheriff, but my understanding is, and he can like give me a scowl if I'm not right here, but we have a mutual aid agreement, and so we don't transfer cost. We have a little less personnel than most of the cities carry, but they come to our aid, we come to their aid. There was a shooting in Forest Grove last night, and our sheriff's department was backing them up, and you know, so it's that kind of thing. There is no money transferred at this time.
I don't know. I guess the opening was for the sheriff. Did you want to address that, Sheriff, at all?
Other than what the commissioner said were very good remarks, I would have nothing more to add.
The sheriff would note that he joins in the commissioner's remarks. Yes, Dolores?
Yes, not so much a question as a comment. Why would Aloha want to change? It's fairly quiet. It has a quasi-rural ambiance. The services are good. TriMet is available to get us back and forth between Hillsborough and Beaverton or up to Cornell Road. I know my neighbors. I live in a quiet little cul-de-sac. Don't change Aloha.
So the concern is, why would we change Aloha? A concern.
I would not change Aloha.
Right. So the challenge with that is people are being born and people are moving into the community. So Mike would be able to give you numbers, but statistically there are a lot of people that are interested in Aloha because it is affordable, so people are coming. People have heard about us, we're not a secret anymore. So unless we put up some big fence to say stop, they're coming. So the challenge is, how are we going to deal with that change? Do we want a business community or not? How are we going to serve our citizens who we want as customers, right, in our Aloha community? Do you want to be able to walk to a restaurant, or are you going to drive to Beaverton or Hillsborough, right? So Aloha is going to change whether we like it or not. The question with the study is how. It isn't if, it's going to change.
One of the changes, the beneficial changes, has been that Commissioner Dick Scouten has had, we now have sidewalks up and down 198, so we're not walking on the shoulder. We're well served by TriMet. Why would we want to change?
We're not well served by TriMet. We're well served by them with the way we are today. The discussion is about where are we going for the future, and how can TriMet serve us better so we can take more cars off the road. So it's, I don't know if you want to speak to that more statistically. Numbers of population coming in, maybe she needs to hear some of those numbers.
So I'm not prepared with numbers, of course. But over the last 10 years, over the last 20 years, Aloha has seen a larger population growth than many of the cities and surrounding areas. For many of the same reasons you say, it has a rural feeling, it has a strong sense of community, but with all those people, we also see increased congestion. So it's not so much changing Aloha, it's trying to make things work better within the community. If we have more congestion, we have to figure out ways to alleviate it, whether it's offering people the opportunity to be able to walk to a restaurant or walk to the services or feel safe getting to transit so that they're more inclined to use it. It's getting, Aloha is also, as you recognize, a crossroads between very vibrant other communities. So we want to be able to address how that increased demand on all the roadways in Aloha, how can we help alleviate that? How can we Karen said, we can't stop change. We don't want to change Aloha, but we want to improve what's there.
We just met the limits of my liberality. Yes.
Chris Leslie, Forum member. I was looking up CPO, Citizen Participation Organization, and CIC, Citizen Involvement Committee. How do these fit into the county, and how are they working in the unincorporated areas?
Chris Leslie, a forum member, asked how are the CPOs and the CICs, which are avenues for citizen participation in the county, how are they functioning, both structurally and I suppose operationally? And I suppose the commissioner could address that.
I fortunately have lots of staff here who'll give me the evil eye if I get it wrong. So, when Oregon Land Use Planning was put in, the #1 goal was you will involve the citizens in these discussions. You will not do anything in a back room that shuts them out. And so the CPO system was Washington County's way of communicating. It's actually operated through the Oregon Extension Service, much the same way a 4-H program would be offered. Oregon, sorry. And so it's operated through that, and with county funding. And the CCI is kind of their senior representatives that get together and meet to make sure that there's some commonality between the CPOs themselves. To tell you the truth, your most active CPOs are probably in the urban unincorporated area. There are rural CPOs that get active when something comes up.
The librarian, CPO 6,
See, that one would be, that's one of your urban ones, so yes.
and CPO 10 is sidewalks.
It all depends what part of the CPO it is. A lot of times for the more rural CPOs, it's somebody trying to lay a big gas line right through the middle of the whole works. It might be somebody who wants to open a composting facility. Food waste. These are all things, they come and go. And even in the urban CPOs, a big issue will swell your meeting from 20 folks to 80 folks. So it just all depends. It's an advisory thing. We count on the folks to be involved. We are well aware that for a lot of our CPOs have 80,000 people of, and 8 of them show up for meetings. So, we have to keep that in mind too. But for the folks who are involved and the folks we count on to go back and talk to their neighbors about issues, the CPO system has seemed to work very well for us. And I think a lot of us are doing what we can to keep it independent of the board.
No, the form is a CPO.
Pardon?
Okay.
People keep in mind we have a static television thing that's going to show me and my voice and the speaker here. So any colloquy with the speaker is probably going to be unintelligible to anyone not in the room. And since people will look at it on the podcast, keep that in mind. Yes, Commissioner Leeper.
This is for Greg. Greg, approximately 40% of the population of Washington County lives in urbanized, unincorporated areas. In your presentation, you, in my mind, almost as an afterthought, brought up the subject of urban service districts. As far as I am concerned, I am a firm believer that many of us that live in the urbanized, unincorporated areas do not want to be annexed into cities. And a few years ago, the county did start a study process to improve the representation, but nothing has come of it. And in my mind, I think a further study of urban service districts would in fact be a good alternative to give the urbanized, unincorporated below. A second one could be the area north of Highway 26. A third one could be Bull Mountain. And a fourth one possibly could be Metzger. And it is my general understanding that in order for them to be implemented, there would likely have to be some state legislation. And I just say to myself, let's get off the damn dime, look at what needs to be done from state legislation, and get something put on the agenda. To me, it's too late for this current legislative session, but let's get on the damn dime and get something done to give better representation at the county government level to the urbanized, unincorporated area citizens. What are your comments?
Well, John Leeper, former commissioner for my district, was just commenting on the option of a service district. And it is one we're working on, and we actually worked on it in the last legislative session and didn't get very far. The way the Oregon law currently is set up, and the way the other service districts like it, because we have to work with them, is that if you want a district for planning, then you need to have a special service district for planning. And another one if you want code enforcement. And another one if you want a higher level of health and human services. And another one, and another one, and another one. They all have to be single issue items. What we're trying to do is change the law to say that even though there isn't, that since we're trying to accumulate a group of city services together, that it be one service district. So instead of asking you to approve like 6 of them at 50 cents a thousand, we'll ask you to approve one for $3 a thousand. Or probably $2.50, because they're just, frankly, they're more economical to operate. Now the problem we ran into in the last session is we crashed into the special service districts, which are all basically single item entities we talked about, and they were concerned about, I believe, they were concerned about the implications of having one service district that provided more than one service. We're working currently with them to find a way that they'll consider would be appropriate for us to change the law so that we can go ahead and provide those. That is one of the ways out. And certainly, I think it's a viable way out. The question would be whether you guys would vote for $2 or $3 a thousand to fund it. But we are working on it.
Just the person I want to ask a question, because next we're going to talk about water, but Marilyn McWilliams is a former member. She has a question.
Marilyn McWilliams, Tualatin Valley Water District Commissioner. We, excuse me, we serve 200,000 customers in unincorporated Washington County and parts of 3 cities. But I'm actually going to ask a question about another type of service. I have been very grateful for the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District Special District for the services offered to seniors at the Elsie Stewart Center, and in particular for the feeding of low-income seniors. And I'm wondering whether I would address this to Mike Dahlstrom. As part of your study, was there any interest in Tualatin Hills developing a second senior center more to the western part of the district to serve the low-income seniors in that part, either north or south of the Sunset Highway?
Just to explain for folks, I'll restate our question. We're going to splice out the questions from the crowd, and the stuff that will be on there will be my restatement of questions. So Commissioner McWilliams, the Bolin Valley Water District, directed a question to Mike Dahlstrom, and relates to the senior citizens services. We've got the LC Service Center in Beaverton, and what plans or potential expansion is possible under the Lower Reedville plan for extension of those type of services to the unincorporated areas around Lower or Reedville. Is that correct?
Thanks, Marilyn. So I can't speak on behalf of THPRD at this point. What I can say is there is consistent acknowledgement for expanded THPRD services, that there's a recognition that both park services, community services, senior services are all desired. And at this point, we continue to work forward now, looking at how we're going to implement several of these responses to these aspirations. 12 Hills Parks and Rec is one of our valuable partners in this project, along with all of the other service districts that serve these areas. So it's a question that is before them, will continue to be before them, but I think we're probably 6+ months away from being able to address it specifically.
Thank you.
I'm John Bell, a foreign member. I'm also kind of bringing in to follow up on Marilyn's question about senior, because I'm on the board for the Meals on Wheels people, and we're looking for a location someplace on the 185th corridor, either the 158 up to 12. We have a whole area between Hillsborough and Beaverton with about 75,000 people to 100,000 in that. It's not, well, say 50,000, 75,000 that are not served with a daily meal program. But I'm also concerned about our homeless program, or low-cost housing, which is truly low cost. My definition of low cost is anything from $300 to $500 a month rent, and what kind of services we can get. And for low or lower density, higher density, anywhere from say 300 to 400 square foot apartments or roomettes, kind of thing, rather than having 1,200 foot house with one person living in it.
John Bell, a volunteer for Meals on Wheels, noted the fact that there's a need for senior services for food, that 185th corridor, and he inquired of Mike Dahlstrom with regard to low-income housing, low-income rents in that area related to the issue of senior services, I believe.
So thank you, John, for the question. The opportunity that came with this grant, that it is funded in part by U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, brings with it that same question. It brings with it the concerns that there is a fair amount of subsidized, regulated housing within the Aloha community already. And one of the two key goals of this study is to identify how we're going to maintain that existing affordable housing, and secondly, how are we going to increase it. So it's a holy grail of housing questions. What we're doing right now is we're trying to identify what we would call a high opportunity area to develop that kind of housing. High opportunity means that it is near necessary services, it's near transit availability. Presumably it would also include being near fresh food sources, and provides members of our community who need those kinds of things just to survive. The challenge, as Commissioner Malinowski has noted a few times, is the funding. So the county is actually looking at ways to either support or decrease the barriers, but this is still a development circumstance, and developers can be encouraged, they can be enticed, they can be offered incentives, but other than the county's Department of Housing Services, which does provide some limited access to housing and subsidization, we're far behind. We're far behind the curve. The request for some of regulated housing is so far behind that they've closed the list for requests. And this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't just Aloha, this isn't even just Washington County, this is US-wide. So we're talking with cohorts throughout the nation on what are possible tools, what are the approaches that we can take, acknowledging that this is a critical social issue. So we continue to look forward to how that implementation could occur. It's not going to be the holistic addressing of the solution that we would all like. Thank you.
Thank you. For our last question, Virginia.
This is for any of you that want to answer it. I'm very encouraged to see the idea of an expanded service district part of the solution to the unincorporated urban areas. And I'm wondering if things like the library and, which is a community building function, and as all of you talked about business development, economic development, those are some things that are truly missing from the urban unincorporated areas, and sometimes citizens step up to try to provide some of that, but I'm wondering if there's room for those two areas within this expanded idea of urban service districts, which is economic development and community development.
Virginia had a question about the expanded urban services districts in unincorporated areas in Washington County and how those might integrate other types of service districts such as library and other associated organizations. I think Commissioner Malin.
To tell you the truth on the community or economic development, that has not been discussed as a part of it. Like I said, Beaverton has set aside millions of dollars for banks to loan to new businesses to get them going. We don't do that. If you're a huge business and you're going to employ 1,000 people, yeah, we'll do all kinds of things. But if it's, Uncle George and Aunt Maud, so that's a continuing issue. I will tell you the service district being proposed is not going to be as inclusive as everything you would get in Beaverton. It's going to be fairly limited in scope. I think a majority of the board still believe that people appreciate the unincorporated areas because they don't have as many restrictions on them as what goes on there. The other issue that's going to have to be ironed out is if we do a service district, are we going to let the cities keep poaching the high-value ground out of it? Are they going to continue to take the industrial and commercial sites and leave us with older residential areas? And it would be very difficult for us to be able to maintain that district if that continued to happen. And one other thing that came with that I didn't mention earlier is that the cities, we had a case where a city ran a water line through unincorporated Washington County neighborhood in Cedar Hills. They could have run it through the city of Beaverton, but if they had, it might have offended people who live in Beaverton and vote for Beaverton councilors. So by running it through Cedar Hills, the lady called Beaverton up and they pointed out to her that she was happy not to be a part of Beaverton before, and since she's not a part of Beaverton, really they shouldn't be talking to her about it. She should check with her government, which turned out to be us. And Washington County issued the permit for it. So we're over and done. So we're seeing other situations where the cities are taking a valuable piece of ground, like the Sunset Center, the Peter Court property, and not worry too much about those folks that are outside the city limits but happen to be right next door to what's going on, because they don't have any political clout in that city. That would be something else I would tell you I think you ought to do. If a big neighborhood decided to annex to Hillsborough, Beaverton, or Tigard, or whoever, is you should ask for districting. Because if you're going to get a city of 50,000 people and you're going to add another 20,000 to it, and there's 5 councilors, you ought to get one. It ought to be your person. So that's another issue that we're going to have is we can't form the service district and then have the cities come through and basically poach all the good stuff. So.
So I would just like to address that economic development and community development, I think, is really what the Aloha Business Association is filling in that gap. We have a community partnership committee. We're in the process of developing an economic development committee. What those are going to look like sort of depends on who steps up to be chair and lead that effort. I went down to meet with Commissioner Scouten and the county and talk about how could we partner together. It's really the business association and private industry needs to partner with government programs so that we can have a really strong product. Because we can't just rely on the government to pay for everything, because when we ask people, do you want to pay for it, a lot of times they say no. So we can create community development ideas, which is what this Aloha Regal study is really a process of doing. And then at the end of the day, we have to decide and we have to prioritize. And so I would invite you and anyone else that's interested in that process to come to the CAC meetings that are the second Wednesday of every month at the fire station and listen to that process. And then I think there are flyers at the back of the room that have the website. And we have a program called Meetings in a Box, where anyone in this room could get that resource and have a community discussion in their own home or their own business or their own whatever. And we really want more citizen input about what does economic development look like? What does community development look like? What are the senior needs, and how can we address them the best we know how with the resources that we have and the resources that we need to go and get? So I think those are two very perfect reasons why the Aloha Business Association exists, and I hope that we can continue to fill the gap and partner with our government entity. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This is a very good meeting, and Commissioner Malinowski, I think, was as frank as I've heard any elected official in Washington County be on those issues. And I think Mike Dahlstrom and our forum member, but I think we're all forum members, aren't we here? Karen Bolin, but even the Washington County Public Affairs Forum is a public-spirited group that meets to expose public issues. Next week, through my inability to follow up appropriately, we may not have PSU population and census here. I think we're going to do water district issues, but we will have a good program next week, and we've got a program committee very active, and we'll get the new program starting February 1st on the agenda. So I thank you all for being here. We ran over a little bit. We're going to trim obviously some off when we put it on the internet. So thank you for coming. It's a great discussion. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming.